I want you to picture a very specific scene. You are standing on a steep, just heavily wooded hillside in western Pennsylvania.
Right.
And the year is 1861. It is barely past sunrise. The ground is completely saturated from spring rains, and the air around you is thick.
Yeah, that sensory detail is so important.
It really is. It carries this aggressive, totally unfamiliar scent. It's like a mix of raw sulfur, decaying leaves, and the sharp tang of wood smoke.
Oh, yeah.
And right there in the mud, literally ankle deep in the absolute worst of it, is a man who goes by the name of Uncle Billy Smith.
Uncle Billy, I love that.
Right. And he is physically hauling a massive, creaking framework of green lumber up the bank of a creek. And he's doing this with nothing but a team of straining mules, some thick hemp rope, and just sheer unbelievable stubbornness.
Which he needed a lot of.
Exactly. Because Uncle Billy, he does not have a degree in geology, he doesn't have a government land use permit, he doesn't even have running water to wash the grime off his hands.
Nothing. Zero infrastructure.
What he has is a primitive, heavy iron drill bit, a wildly dangerous steam boiler, and this completely unhinged idea that he can punch a hole into the bedrock and pull liquid wealth straight out of the earth.
It's an incredible image. Just because of how deeply physical it is, you know?
Yeah.
We're so used to energy being an invisible utility today. You flip a switch and the lights come on.
Right, you don't even think about it.
Exactly. But in 1861, energy was a man wrestling heavy timber in the freezing mud. He was betting his entire physical existence on a hunch.
And that physical gamble, that sets up the core contrast of this entire era. Because by nightfall on that muddy hillside, half the men in that county are going to be millionaires on paper.
On paper being the key phrase there.
Absolutely. They will be trading leases worth absolute fortunes. But by the following spring, most of them are going to be completely destitute.
Yeah, it's wild.
They will have been swindled out of their claims by sharper operators, or their wells will have floated with groundwater. Or, honestly, far too often, they'll be dead in a catastrophic, uncontainable rig fire.
Which happened all the time.
It did. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are extracting the unvarnished truth about the wildest, most dangerously unregulated chapter in the entire history of American energy.
I'm so ready for this.
We are looking at a hyper-condensed window of time, roughly the 1860s to the 1890s. And there were zero safety codes, zero environmental regulations, and zero precedents.
None whatsoever.
Just mud, astronomical amounts of money flowing overnight, and men who were acting like they were completely out of their minds. So to help synthesize this chaos, I've got our expert here.
It's an absolute pleasure to unpack this because, the thesis we have to establish right away is that this chaotic era, this violent frenzy in the Pennsylvania woods, it wasn't just some weird historical anomaly.
Right.
It wasn't a quirky side quest in the expansion of America. Yeah. What we are actually looking at is the brutal, rapid prototyping phase of the modern industrial world.
That's a great way to put it. Rapid prototyping.
Yeah. The systems that dictate our lives today, global energy infrastructure, complex corporate scaling, continuous flow logistics, modern property law, all of that was entirely born in the blood and mud of those creek beds.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can truly understand why thousands of men rushed into those woods, we really have to understand the sheer existential desperation of the global economy that pushed them there.
The broader context is everything here.
It really is. So let's step back slightly from the 1860s and look at the mechanical reality of the mid-1800s. You have to realize that this was a world running right into a biological wall.
A literal physical wall.
Yes. America and Europe were relying almost entirely on whale oil, lard, and wood to function. You walked into a major city and the ambient smell was rendering animal fat.
Oh, it must have been awful.
Awful. People lit their homes with tallow candles made from beef fat or lamps burning camphene, which, by the way, was highly explosive.
Or very dangerous.
Right. It was a dark, incredibly pungent world. It's like if a modern tech giant was building massive server farms everywhere, but they completely ran out of cooling systems. The whole revolution was about to literally grind to a smoking halt.
That server farm analogy is perfect. Because it was pungent, yes, but critically, it was a world that was physically seizing up.
Right.
We always talk about the Industrial Revolution as this unstoppable, roaring engine of progress, steam power, massive textile mills, locomotives crossing continents.
The history book version.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was roaring, sure, but it was also generating an unbelievable amount of physical friction.
Just metal on metal.
Right. You had massive cast iron gears, thousands of fast-spinning spindles and cotton mills, heavy steam engine pistons multiplying at an unprecedented unprecedented rate across the globe.
And obviously, metal scraping on metal at high speeds generates immense heat.
Immense heat. And to manage that heat and friction, you need high viscosity operational fluids. You need lubrication. But machinery breaks down when the only lubricants available are biologically sourced. They were literally using rendered pig fat and sperm whale oil to lubricate heavy industrial machinery.
Which is just mind-boggling to think about today. I mean, you have a massive iron steam engine, and you're keeping it running by smearing animal fat on the gears.
That's exactly what they did.
But lard gets gummy, right? It goes rancid. I imagine it breaks down under high temperatures.
Oh, it degrades incredibly fast. And more importantly, the supply chain for biological lubricants was completely collapsing.
Right, the whales.
Yeah. The whaling fleets out of New England had hunted the sperm whale to near extinction. Ships were having to sail deeper and deeper into the Pacific.
Just to find them.
Right, staying out for 3 or 4 years at a time just to bring back a fraction of the oil they used to find. So the price of high-quality whale oil was just skyrocketing.
It was becoming a luxury good.
Absolutely. The entire trajectory of human mechanical progress was running headfirst into this hard biological limit. I mean, you can only render so much fat. You can only kill so many whales.
Wow. So the mechanical revolution was about to literally grind to a screeching halt. But wait, there's a massive disconnect here.
Yeah.
Because while the textile mills in Manchester and Boston are, seizing up for lack of lubrication, back in western Pennsylvania, local residents have actually known about this thing called Seneca oil for decades.
Oh, they were very familiar with it.
Right. They had these natural black, oily seeps just bubbling out of the ground into the creeks. Native Americans had been skimming it off the water for centuries.
Using it for practical things.
Exactly. Using it for waterproofing canoes and as a topical medicine. And the early European settlers just sort of copied them. They bottled this crude oil and sold it as a literal snake oil cure-all tonic.
It was sold in these tiny half-ounce glass vials from the backs of wagons.
Which is so funny to picture.
Yes, it is. The instructions literally said to rub it on a bad knee for rheumatism or even swallow a spoonful for a cough.
Swallowing raw crude oil.
Yeah. They were treating the most energy-dense substance on the planet as a quaint rural curiosity.
Which is hilarious in retrospect, but obviously the leap from swallowing black sludge for a cough to powering the global economy, that didn't happen by accident.
No, not
It
right.
required a massive scientific intervention. And the turning point comes in 1854 with a Yale chemist named Benjamin Silliman Jr.
Silliman is crucial.
He is. He gets his hands on a barrel of this Pennsylvania rock oil, and he subjects it to fractional distillation.
And this is where the paradigm entirely shifts, because Silliman doesn't just boil it like you would to distill alcohol.
Right, he treats it differently.
He understands that crude oil isn't a single substance. It's a highly complex soup of hydrocarbon chains, and they all have different molecular weights.
And because they have different weights, they boil and vaporize at different temperatures, right?
Exactly. So Silliman carefully heats the crude in a glass retort, and he captures the vapors at specific escalating temperature thresholds.
Like separating the layers?
Precisely. He isolates the highly volatile light ends, what we would now call naphtha and gasoline, and he sets those aside. Then he hits the middle, distillates.
And what does he get?
What condenses in his lab is this beautiful, clear liquid. He tests it in a standard camphene lamp, and the result is astonishing.
It actually worked.
It burns with a brilliant, steady, luminous white flame. It doesn't smoke. It doesn't smell like burning animal fat. He had basically isolated kerosene.
Wow. And just as importantly, the heavier fractions left at the bottom of his retort, those proved to be incredibly stable, heat-resistant mechanical lubricants, right?
Yes. He solved two massive problems at once.
He basically solves the lighting crisis and the friction crisis in a single laboratory experiment. I mean, ask yourself what it would feel like to read that report in 1854.
It must have been mind-blowing.
To realize that the entire structural foundation for the future of global lighting and heavy manufacturing isn't swimming in the Pacific Ocean. It's literally trapped in the dirt.
The psychological shift there cannot be overstated. You move from biological reliance to geological extraction.
Right.
But, here is the brutal reality of Silliman's breakthrough. Knowing the chemistry of kerosene is completely useless if you can't secure the raw material at industrial scale.
You need a lot of it.
Exactly. Skimming oil off the top of a creek with a wool blanket, which is literally how they were doing it back then, yields maybe a few gallons a day.
A wool blanket. That's so primitive.
Right. And you cannot fuel a global revolution with a wool blanket.
No, you need thousands of barrels. which forces the narrative to pivot from high-level Yale chemistry to pure, desperate, on-the-ground extraction. And the guy who figures this out is one of those unlikely figures in industrial history.
Oh, Edwin Drake.
Yes, Edwin Drake.
Drake is fascinating because he possesses absolutely none of the qualifications you would expect for the man who basically pioneers the global petroleum industry.
None at all. I mean, he wasn't an engineer, he wasn't a geologist. He was literally a former railroad conductor who happened to be staying in the same hotel as the financiers who were trying to figure out how to get this oil out of the ground.
It was pure coincidence.
Right. He had a free railroad pass, which meant they didn't have to pay for his travel, and he apparently had an incredibly stubborn disposition.
It was probably his most valuable asset.
Exactly. So this newly formed Seneca Oil Company hires him. They send him to Titusville, Pennsylvania, and they give him the title of Colonel Edwin Drake.
The famous Colonel Drake.
Yeah. And just to be perfectly clear to everyone listening, he was never in the military. It was a completely fake title.
Completely fabricated.
They just printed it on his correspondence purely to impress the rural Pennsylvania farmers and make him look like some sort of legitimate authority figure.
It's corporate theater in its purest form, really.
Yeah.
They needed the locals to lease them land and, a colonel commands respect.
Yeah, it's great grift.
But once Drake gets to Titusville, the theater ends and the brutal physics of the earth just take over. The initial assumption, naturally, was that you could just dig a massive trench or a mine shaft down to the oil.
Right, like a coal mine. You just send guys down with pickaxes.
Exactly. But the water table in western Pennsylvania is incredibly high. You dig 10 feet down and the hole immediately fills with groundwater.
Oh, so it just caves in.
Yeah, the walls collapse. It's a muddy, unstable mess. Drake spends months trying to dig, and he nearly bankrupts the company doing it.
Months of just digging in the mud.
His financiers actually write to him and tell him to pay off his debts and come home. The project is considered a complete failure.
But Drake ignores the letter. He just decides to abandon digging and adapt a technique used by local salt drillers. Right?
Yeah, the salt drillers knew what they were doing.
He decides to punch a narrow hole into the earth using a steam-powered walking beam. But he hits the exact same problem. As soon as he drills into the soft dirt, the groundwater rushes in and collapses the borehole.
It was incredibly frustrating.
And this is where Drake actually makes his one massive contribution to human engineering. He invents the drive pipe.
Yes. This is the crucial mechanical innovation. Drake realizes you can't just drill through soft mud. You have to physically isolate the borehole from the surrounding water table.
Makes sense.
So he takes these sections of heavy cast iron pipe and he uses a massive wooden mallet to physically drive them down into the ground.
Just hammering them into the dirt.
Section by section, through the mud and sand until the iron pipe finally hits solid bedrock. Once the pipe is sealed against the rock, then he runs his drill bit down inside the empty pipe.
It's basically a massive metallic straw that protects the drill bit from the collapsing earth.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
It's so simple, but nobody had ever applied it to oil extraction. So in late August of 1859, using this drive pipe, Drake's drill drops into a crevice at a depth of merely 69 feet.
69 feet?
Think about that depth. 69 feet is nothing. You could probably throw a baseball 69 feet in the air.
Easily.
But when they pulled the bit up the next morning, that iron pipe is just bubbling with crude oil.
And the yield from that, it changes the math of the world instantly.
Yeah.
The Drake well starts producing 25 barrels a day.
Wow.
Now, to put that in perspective, 25 barrels was more oil than the entire world's previous gathering methods had produced in a month.
In a single day.
Right, and within a year, better wells were doing 10 times that volume.
But I have to ask you, looking at his background, his total lack of scientific training, and the sheer luck of hitting an oil trap at just 69 feet, was Drake actually a visionary? Or is he just the luckiest amateur in history who was too stubborn to read the letter telling him he was fired?
Well, what's fascinating here is that that's the debate that haunts his legacy.
I bet.
Drake wasn't a visionary in the sense of, understanding the geology of anticlines or subterranean pressure. He didn't know any of that.
Right.
But his stubbornness was structurally necessary. The early oil industry required someone who was completely immune to conventional wisdom.
They needed a guy who wouldn't quit.
Exactly. The salt drillers told him he was crazy. The Yale chemist couldn't tell him how to get it out of the ground. He simply refused to accept the physical limitations right in front of him.
Yeah.
But the tragic irony of Edwin Drake is that he neglected to patent his drive pipe invention.
Wait, he didn't patent it?
No, he never patented it. He made virtually no money off the foundational technology of the extraction industry.
That is heartbreaking.
It is. He eventually lost what little he did make in speculative oil stocks and ended up impoverished.
Oh, wow.
But his success at Titusville proved two things that broke the world wide open. One, the oil was trapped in subterranean reservoirs, and two, you could actively drill for it.
And the moment you prove that a man with a steam engine and an iron pipe can pull liquid gold out of the dirt at 25 barrels a day, I mean, the human reaction is entirely predictable.
Utter madness.
It is an immediate, terrifying, unstoppable stampede. Every desperate man with a shovel, a mule, and a high tolerance for risk just flooded into western Pennsylvania.
They swarmed the place.
Which brings us to the logistics of an actual boom. I want to look specifically at the anatomy of Pithole City, Pennsylvania, because it perfectly illustrates the absolute fever dream of this era.
If Drake's well was the spark, Pithole City was the uncontrollable forest fire.
Yes.
It completely challenges our fundamental understanding of how human settlements are created.
Just consider the timeline for a second. We are in the valley of Oil Creek. In January of 1865, Pithole City simply does not exist.
It's just trees.
It is a quiet, heavily wooded piece of farmland owned by a guy named Thomas Holmden. Then, a wildcat drilling operation hits a massive gusher on his property, the Fraser Well. By August of 1865, which is just 8 months later, that empty patch of farmland has a population of 15,000 people.
It is a demographic explosion that is honestly hard to fathom.
It really is.
And we aren't talking about 15,000 people pitching canvas tents and camping out in the mud.
No. That's the crazy part. By August, Pithole had paved streets, it had major banks,
In 8 months?
it had telegraph offices, 2 separate daily newspapers running off actual printing presses, a massive red light district, and an astonishing 57 hotels and boarding houses.
57 hotels.
57. The Bond House Hotel, for instance, cost $80,000 to build in 1865 money, and it had a dining room that seated hundreds of people.
Just massive infrastructure.
The Pithole Post Office was handling more daily mail than any city in the entire state of Pennsylvania, with the sole exception of Philadelphia.
That's a wild statistic.
And all of this material, the lumber, the printing presses, the bank vaults, the food for 15,000 men, all of it had to be hauled in over dirt trails.
Through the mud.
Right. And why? Because wells like the United States, well, were suddenly producing an unheard of 2,000 barrels of oil in a single day.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. That volume, 2,000 barrels a day from a single hole, it completely shattered the economic reality of the region.
It's too much wealth too fast.
Exactly. But Pithole is critical to study because it forces us to redefine the concept of what a city even is.
Okay, how so?
Usually, urban growth is organic, right? People settle near a river for trade, they build agriculture, schools follow, multi-generational communities start to form.
Sure, people put down roots.
It's ecosystem. But Pithole was not an ecosystem. It was a purely extractive mechanism. It was an eruption driven by sheer mathematical greed.
Wow.
No one moved to Pithole to raise a family. They moved to Pithole to siphon the earth, get rich, and leave as fast as possible.
Right. I mean, if you want a modern comparison, imagine a developer trying to build a modern, mid-sized city from scratch. Building 57 hotels, 2 media companies, banking infrastructure, and housing for 15,000 people in 8 months.
It's impossible.
It's like trying to build all of that in the time it usually takes a homeowner today just to get the zoning permits approved for a kitchen remodel.
That's exactly it.
It requires a total suspension of normal civic planning. But of course, an economy based entirely on the uncontrolled depletion of a finite subsurface resource has a brutal expiration date.
Always.
Because gravity and pressure always win.
They do. The geology simply couldn't sustain that extraction rate. They were punching holes right next to each other, just bleeding the subterranean reservoir dry.
Too many straws in the same cup.
Exactly. And they were rapidly depleting the natural gas pressure that was actually pushing the oil to the surface.
So by 1867, which is just 2 years later, the oil beneath Pithole ran out.
Just gone.
The massive gushers slowed to a trickle and then to nothing. And the collapse was actually faster than the rise. The banks closed, the newspapers folded, the 15,000 people literally packed their bags and walked away.
A mass exodus.
The massive hotels were either abandoned or they caught fire mysteriously for insurance money, or they were dismantled just so the lumber could be sold for scrap.
Yeah, strip it down.
In 1870, the actual county land where this bustling metropolis of Pithole had stood was put up for public auction. Do you know what it sold for?
It's my favorite detail. $4.37.
$4.37
Oh.
for the footprint of an entire city.
That auction price of $4.37 is arguably the most poetic, just devastating symbol of a resource-dependent economic bubble in human history.
It really paints a picture.
It perfectly illustrates the life cycle of the wildcat era. When the resource is flowing, the land is effectively priceless.
You can't put a number on it.
But the moment the resource is exhausted, the massive infrastructure built on top of it is entirely worthless. It's a ghost town narrative on fast forward.
But while Pithole died, it actually exposed a much larger systemic problem. Pithole proved that pulling massive, ridiculous volumes of oil out of the earth was actually the easy part.
Right, they figured that out quickly.
The real nightmare was what to do with it once it was on the surface. I mean, if you have a well pumping 2,000 barrels a day, but you are trapped in a muddy valley miles away from the nearest railroad, that oil is essentially worthless.
You can't sell it if you can't move it.
You have a massive logistical bottleneck, which shifts the power dynamic of the entire industry away from the geologists to the drillers and creates the transportation war.
This is a critical inflection point. The narrative transitions from the physics of geology to the brutal realities of terrestrial economics.
Right, because a commodity only has value if you can get it to a market to be refined and sold.
And the math of getting it to market in the 1860s was absolutely absurd. Let's just look at the actual economics of the Oil Creek Valley. At the height of the boom, the heavy wooden barrels used to store the oil were so scarce that the empty barrel often cost more than the oil inside it.
Which is just a crazy economic inversion.
Totally crazy. Crude oil was selling at the wellhead for roughly $4 a barrel. But to get that barrel to the railhead, you had to hire Teamsters.
Ah, the Teamsters. Right, these incredibly tough, aggressive guys driving heavy horse-drawn wagons. And the Teamsters were charging $3 just to move one barrel a mere 5 miles.
So the transportation cost is eating 75% of the gross revenue.
Just off the top.
That is a completely unsustainable margin for the producers. The drillers are taking all the physical and financial risk of pulling the oil out of the ground, but the Teamsters are essentially acting as an inescapable toll booth.
Yeah.
They're walking away with the lion's share of the profit.
And the physical conditions of this transport were hellish. We aren't talking about paved roads here. We are talking about thousands of heavy wagons churning the unpaved Pennsylvania dirt into a sea of deep, viscous mud.
Oh, it was notoriously bad.
The mud was so deep that horses would frequently drown in it.
Just sink right in.
The congestion was so bad that it could take a teamster 16 hours of brutal labor just to drag a wagon those 5 miles.
16 hours for 5 miles.
You could literally walk it faster.
Yeah.
But obviously you can't walk carrying 300 pounds of crude oil on your back.
The Teamsters held an absolute monopoly because there was no alternative physical mechanism for moving bulk liquids over land.
They were the only game in town.
They knew it, and they ruthlessly exploited their pricing power.
But human ingenuity, especially when millions of dollars are bleeding out of a supply chain, usually finds a technological bypass.
Always does.
So in 1865, an oil buyer named Samuel Van Sickle decides he is done paying the Teamsters. He looks at the problem and realizes that moving a fluid by putting it into a discrete wooden container, loading that container onto a biological transport mechanism, meaning a horse, and dragging it through the mud, is fundamentally inefficient.
It's just a bad system.
So he designs the very first successful crude oil pipeline.
And we really have to talk about the engineering of this because it wasn't simple. He couldn't just lay a rubber hose.
Right, you can't just run a garden hose through the woods.
Van Sickle used 2-inch lap-welded wrought iron pipes. He laid a continuous iron line over 5 miles of incredibly uneven, hilly terrain.
Up and down the ridges.
But gravity and internal friction are the enemies of fluid transport. If you just pour oil into a pipe, it's not going to just flow 5 miles over hills on its own.
They'll just pool at the bottom.
So Van Sickle integrated 3 massive steam-powered relay pumps along the route to maintain the pressure and force the crude oil over the ridges.
Wow. It's a revolutionary leap in industrial architecture.
Yeah.
If you think about it in modern network terms, the Teamsters were operating like a dial-up modem.
Oh, like that comparison.
Yeah, taking discrete packets of information, or in this case, barrels of oil, and sending them slowly, one at a time, through a highly congested pathway. Van Sickle's pipeline was the invention of broadband.
It was a continuous stream.
It allowed for the uninterrupted flow of massive volume. That 5-mile pipe could move 800 barrels of oil a day, quietly, cleanly, and for a fraction of the cost.
But wait, the Teamsters had to realize instantly that this iron pipe was an existential threat to their entire livelihood, right?
Oh, immediately.
They weren't just going to look at the steam pumps, tip their hats, and politely file for unemployment.
Not at all.
Yeah.
The reaction was violent and immediate. The Teamsters realized that technology was actively rendering their physical labor obsolete.
Which happens a lot in history.
So they went to war. They engaged in literal physical sabotage. Under the cover of darkness, gangs of Teamsters would ride out, dig up Van Sickle's pipeline, and use pickaxes to smash the iron joints apart.
Wow.
They spilled thousands of gallons of oil right into the dirt. They sent armed men to threaten the pipeline workers. They chained their wagons together across the rights-of-way to block the construction crews.
Just total blockades.
It's like looking at the 19th century version of taxi drivers protesting the arrival of rideshare apps, but with vastly higher stakes. Virtually no police presence to enforce the law, and the active destruction of multi-million-dollar infrastructure.
It's a perfect comparison of labor clashing with technological efficiency.
Yeah.
But Van Sickle fought back. He actually hired his own private security force of armed guards with rifles to patrol the 5-mile length of the pipe day and night.
Basically a private army.
He eventually forced the continuous flow to succeed. And the broader implication of this victory cannot be overstated. Van Sickle's pipeline forever shifted the true center of power in the global energy industry.
How so? Because the drillers still had the oil, right?
Yes, but the pipeline proved that the real power, the inescapable leverage, wasn't in finding the resource. The power was in controlling the logistical grid.
The infrastructure.
Exactly. The pipeline doomed the Teamsters, but it birthed the modern system of continuous energy transport. It proved that the entity that controls the flow of the commodity dictates the market for the commodity.
Control the flow, control the world. But before we get to the corporate titans who eventually mastered that control, we absolutely cannot ignore the horrific human toll required to build this system.
It was grim.
Because while the infrastructure was scaling up exponentially and thousands of men were working 16-hour days to feed the pipelines, the entire industry was operating without even a conceptual framework of safety protocols.
Safety wasn't even a word they used.
The speed of scaling completely outpaced human survivability.
This raises an important question about the era, and it's honestly the darkest, most visceral aspect of the Boomtown phase. The technology of extraction was profoundly violent, and the human machinery was treated as entirely disposable.
Let's look at the daily reality of a roughneck in the 1860s. You are living in a canvas tent or a flimsy, uninsulated boarding house packed with 40 other exhausted men.
Sleeping in shifts, usually.
Your diet consists almost entirely of salt pork, hardtack, and beans. You're working 12 to 16-hour shifts in the freezing rain. You're breathing in a constant fine mist of volatile crude oil all day long, so your clothes are completely saturated in flammable hydrocarbons.
You're practically a walking candle.
And the actual drilling technology you're operating, these cable tool rigs, they were terrifying pieces of primitive engineering.
To understand the danger, you really have to understand the physics of a cable tool rig.
Right, how do they work?
It is not like modern rotary drilling, where a diamond bit smoothly grinds through the rock. Cable tool drilling is essentially percussive. It's brute force.
So you built a 40 to 60 foot tall derrick out of green, unseasoned lumber.
Yeah.
At the top is a pulley. You suspend a massive, solid iron drill bit, which could weigh up to 3,000 pounds, from a thick hemp rope or a wire cable.
A 3,000-pound piece of iron.
And you use a steam engine to power a heavy wooden walking beam that simply lifts that massive iron weight up a few feet and drops it. Over and over. Lift and drop, lift and drop.
I must have been deafened.
The bit physically pulverizes the bedrock through repeated impact.
But imagine the mechanical stress on that system. You have 3,000 pounds of iron violently slamming into solid rock, sending shockwaves back up a tension cable thousands of times a day.
Right.
The metal fatigues, the hemp rope spray.
And when a cable snaps under that tension, it is lethal. That massive iron bit, or the heavy iron tools used to clear the hole, they just come plummeting down through the derrick at killing speed.
Nowhere to hide.
Men working on the rig floor had limbs torn off or were simply crushed instantly. You're standing underneath a heavy metal guillotine for 13 hours a day.
It's horrifying.
But remarkably, the falling iron wasn't even the primary threat. The real nightmare, the absolute terror of the oil fields, was the fire.
Because you cannot drill for oil without encountering natural gas. They are geologically bound together.
Exactly. When you punch a hole into a subterranean reservoir, you aren't just hitting a pool of liquid. You are penetrating a highly pressurized pocket of methane and natural gas that has been trapped for millions of years.
Under immense pressure.
Today, we capture that gas and pipe it into our homes. But in the 1860s, natural gas had zero commercial value. Nobody wanted it, and nobody had the technology to store it.
It was a nuisance.
So when a well hit gas, they simply let it vent straight up into the open air around the derrick. Furthermore, modern drilling uses heavy fluids and complex blowout preventers to cap the pressure. Back then, they had nothing.
No safeguards at all.
If you hit a high-pressure zone, the well would blow out, shooting a deafening geyser of crude oil, rocks, and explosive gas 60 feet into the air.
The physical environment around a blowout is just a recipe for absolute disaster. You have a highly combustible, invisible gas cloud settling over the entire rig site.
Right.
And right next to that rig, you have a wood-fired steam boiler with an open firebox powering the walking beam.
An open flame right next to a gas cloud.
You have men swinging iron wrenches that can strike a spark against the casing. You have exhausted workers smoking cigars.
It isn't a possibility of fire. It is a mathematical certainty of ignition. And when it ignited, the results were apocalyptic.
Truly.
There were no chemical fire suppressants like aqueous film-forming foam. There was no organized fire department. If a pressurized well caught fire, it became a roaring blowtorch shooting 100 feet into the air.
You just had to run.
It just had to burn until the subterranean pressure exhausted itself, which could take weeks.
Yeah.
The 1866 Oil Creek fire is a prime example of how uncontrollable this was.
The scale of that specific disaster is hard to overstate.
The wells along the creek were leaking so much excess oil that a thick slick of crude had literally pooled on the surface of the moving water.
Just floating there.
Someone, likely a careless smoker, dropped a spark near the water's edge. The creek itself caught fire. A literal river of flame swept down the valley, igniting the wooden derricks, the storage tanks, and the boarding houses along the banks.
A river of fire.
Over 50 people were burned alive or drowned trying to escape. Hundreds were permanently disfigured. The column of fire and black smoke was so massive you could clearly see the glow in the night sky from 30 miles away.
It was a vision of hell. But, examining this brings up a profound psychological paradox. We really have to look at the mental framework of the men who witnessed this.
That's exactly what I struggle with. Put yourself in that environment. You were standing in the mud. Your clothes smell like gasoline.
Right.
You just watched a river turn into a wall of fire.
Oh,
And you just spent the weekend burying your friends in unmarked graves.
right.
Why does anyone stay?
It's a great question.
How do you watch that level of apocalyptic violence on a Friday and consciously decide to walk back onto the rig floor for your shift on Monday morning?
To understand that, you have to realize that the boomtown economy required a complete short-circuiting of the standard human survival instinct.
Okay, what do you mean?
The men pouring into these fields were largely poor. Many were traumatized veterans fresh out of the brutal combat of the Civil War.
So they'd already seen the worst.
Exactly. And they had virtually zero prospects for upward mobility in the standard agrarian economy.
So the risk calculation is different.
Entirely different. The potential to strike a gusher and achieve literal generational wealth in a single afternoon was so intoxicating that it completely overpowered their fear of horrific death.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In this hyper-capitalist, totally unregulated environment, death wasn't viewed as a systemic failure that management needed to solve.
Right.
It was just viewed as a line item expense, a tragic but inevitable cost of doing business. It was the lottery, but you bought your ticket with your physical safety. And we must remember, the concept of occupational safety didn't exist. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, was an entire century away.
There was nobody coming to inspect the rig.
No safety net, no workers' compensation, no federal oversight. You accepted the lethal odds of the rig, or you starved.
But all of this chaos, the exploding boilers, the wildly fluctuating prices, the dead drillers, the sabotaged pipelines, it all creates a massive economic vulnerability.
Yes, it does.
When an industry is this violent and unpredictable, it is begging for someone to step in who prefers order over gambling. The narrative has to pivot away from the wildcatters rolling the dice in the mud to the man who ultimately tamed the entire system. Because chaos breeds the system's thinker.
That is a fundamental law of capitalism.
Hmm.
In a gold rush, the guys digging the holes rarely keep the gold.
Right, it's the guy selling the shovels.
Or the man who figures out how to institutionalize the chaos. He is the one who ends up owning the board.
Let's draw a contrast to see how this transition actually happened. Take a typical speculator of the 1860s, a guy named John Wilkes. Not the assassin, obviously, but a prominent Pittsburgh attorney. Wilkes wasn't drilling. He was a gambler playing the lease market.
Paper trading.
He was buying the rights to drill on a piece of land and flipping that paper to someone else before a well was even spudded. It was essentially an early, totally unregulated options market.
Sounds incredibly risky.
It was. On one particularly volatile day, Wilkes reportedly cleared $40,000 in pure profit from trading paper leases in the 1860s.
That is an unimaginable fortune back then.
He hits the absolute peak of the Boomtown high.
And then what?
And then, the very same afternoon, he reinvests it all into a new set of leases. But the wells on that land come up dry. It's a dry hole.
Oh no.
By sundown, Wilkes has lost every single penny of that $40,000. He goes from staggering wealth to total ruin in a 12-hour cycle.
Wilkes is the perfect avatar for the wildcatter mentality. It's an addiction to the volatility itself.
Right. But watching all of this frenzied gambling from a safe distance in Cleveland, Ohio, is a young produce merchant named John D. Rockefeller.
Enter Rockefeller.
Rockefeller is a fascinating psychological contrast here. He was not a roughneck. He had zero desire to stand in the mud dodging snapping cables.
Not his style at all.
He wasn't a gambler like Wilkes.
Yeah.
In fact, he despised volatility. Rockefeller was a pure, cold-blooded systems thinker. He looks at the oil industry, sees the massive global demand for kerosene, but sees the extraction side as a chaotic nightmare.
Too much risk.
So in 1870, he found Standard Oil. He focuses entirely on refining, and the speed of his conquest is just terrifying. By 1882, just 12 years later, this single man controls roughly 80% of all oil refining capacity in the United States.
The consolidation of that much global power in slightly over a decade is just breathtaking.
It really is.
But how he achieved it is what separates him from everyone else in the valley.
Right, because he didn't do it by being a better driller. He never wanted to pull the oil out of the ground.
Exactly. Rockefeller realized that the driller takes all the geological risk, but the refiner acts as the ultimate bottleneck. Every drop of oil, no matter who finds it, has to be chemically processed into kerosene before it can be sold to a consumer. Rockefeller understood the pipeline lesson. Control the flow.
So what does this all mean? How does he actually build the monopoly? Through sheer structural ruthlessness, Rockefeller bypasses the oil fields entirely and goes straight to the railroads.
A transport mechanism.
He negotiates massive, secret volume discounts rebates for shipping Standard Oil's refined kerosene. But he doesn't stop there. He forces the railroads to pay him drawbacks.
Explain drawbacks because it's so devious.
It's wild. Meaning every time a competing refiner shipped a barrel of oil on that railroad, the railroad had to pay a portion of that competitor's freight fee directly to Rockefeller.
It's an incredibly aggressive mechanism. He's literally making a profit off his competitors' transportation costs.
Armed with that insurmountable mathematical advantage, he systematically approaches rival refiners and offers to buy them out.
Like a mob boss.
If they refuse, he uses his shipping discounts to undercut their prices until they go bankrupt, and then he buys their assets for pennies.
Cold and calculated.
He creates a corporate trust structure so legally complex, utilizing holding companies and silent boards of directors, that a frustrated congressman trying to investigate Standard Oil famously said it was like trying to hold smoke with your bare hands.
The government was operating on agrarian legal principles, playing checkers, while Rockefeller had basically invented a three-dimensional game of corporate chess.
Right.
He essentially invented horizontal integration.
But wait, isn't Rockefeller just a monopolist exploiting the system?
Yeah.
People paint him purely as a villain who choked the free market. We often think of the oil barons as the guys covered in black gold shouting Eureka, but Rockefeller realized the guy getting his hands dirty is the sucker. The guy owning the refinery is the king.
Well, he was absolutely a ruthless monopolist, but from a systems engineering perspective, his monopoly solved the fatal flaw of the wildcat model.
Which was the overproduction.
Right. The chaotic overproduction of places like Pithole crashed the price of crude, ruining everyone. Rockefeller brought stabilization, he rationalized the market, and he didn't just win through financial manipulation, he also won through superior scientific integration.
Yes, the Lima, Indiana field is the perfect example of his scientific leverage. In the 1880s, Drillers strike a massive new subterranean oil field stretching across western Ohio and Indiana.
A huge find.
Huge quantities of crude oil are coming out of the ground.
Okay.
But there's a catastrophic catch. The geology of this specific region means the crude oil is incredibly heavy in sulfur compounds, specifically mercaptans.
And sulfur is a nightmare for refining.
It's awful. First of all, mercaptans smell exactly like rotting eggs or a skunk.
Gross.
It is violently pungent. If you try to refine lima crude using standard distillation, the resulting kerosene still contains the sulfur.
Right, it carries over.
When a consumer burns that kerosene in their living room lamp, the smoke ruins the wallpaper, it smells like a sewer, and literally stings the eyes.
Nobody's buying that.
So the market entirely rejects it. Every other refiner in the country says Lima oil is useless, toxic sludge. The drillers are devastated, and the price of Lima crude plummets to next to nothing.
And this is where Rockefeller's tolerance for calculated long-term risk really comes in.
Exactly. While everyone else abandons Ohio, Rockefeller quietly steps in and buys up millions of barrels of this worthless sulfur oil for pennies on the dollar. He buys the leases, the wells, everything.
He buys the whole problem.
Then he brings in a brilliant chemist named Herman Frasch. He tells Frasch, solve the sulfur problem. Frasch sets up a lab and realizes that sulfur binds chemically to certain metals. So he introduces copper oxide into the distillation process.
Brilliant chemical bypass.
Why?
The copper oxide reacts with the sulfur compounds in the crude oil, precipitating out as solid copper sulfide, which can then be safely filtered away.
Right. The copper essentially strips the skunk smell right out of the oil. Suddenly, millions of barrels of worthless toxic sludge are transformed into premium, sweet-burning kerosene.
And he owns all of it.
And because Rockefeller had already bought up the entire supply chain while everyone else thought it was garbage, he reaps an absolutely colossal fortune. He uses chemistry to completely invoke an economic disaster.
If we synthesize Rockefeller's genius, it all traces back to a fundamental abhorrence of wildcat risk.
Yeah.
He looked at the fires on Oil Creek, the exploding boilers, guys like John Wilkes losing fortunes on dry holes, and he decided that leaving the foundation of the global economy to chance was simply unacceptable.
It was bad business.
He refused to play the geological lottery. Instead, he built an inescapable toll booth chemically and logistically on every single drop of oil that came out of the ground. He commoditized the chaos.
And in doing so, he built the blueprint for the modern multinational corporation, which leads us to the final chapter of this deep dive, because eventually, the high-pressure gas driving those original Pennsylvania wells began to exhaust itself.
The boom moved on.
The easy, shallow oil was gone. The wildcatters were forced to pack up their derricks and push the frontier westward into Ohio, then Texas, Oklahoma, and California. But as they moved, they carried the DNA of those early mud puddles with them, solidifying wild experiments into permanent global institutions. Let's look at the immense, unlikely legacy of the Wild West of oil.
The geographic expansion was inevitable, sure, but the structural templates forged in Pennsylvania traveled with them. The chaos hardened into architecture.
Let's start with the immediate strategic importance of the commodity itself. The transition of oil from a medicine to a geopolitical weapon happened at terrifying speed.
It really did.
The source material notes the fate of the Burning Springs oil field in West Virginia. By 1863, the Civil War is raging. Oil is no longer a novelty. It is highly lucrative and increasingly vital for lubricating military supply trains and naval machinery.
It's becoming essential.
Confederate forces under General William Grumble Jones actually launch a massive cavalry raid deep into Union territory, specifically to target Burning Springs.
Wow.
They destroy the derricks, burn the storage tanks, and set the river on fire, destroying hundreds of thousands of barrels. They recognized in 1863 that oil was a strategic military asset that had to be denied to the enemy.
It's the first instance of petroleum warfare, a harbinger of the 20th century, where global conflicts would be entirely dictated by the control of oil fields.
And as the industry expanded westward, it left behind a profound infrastructure legacy. The pipeline, which Van Sickle invented just to bypass some angry guys with horse wagons in the mud, evolved into a massive subterranean circulatory system.
Everywhere you look.
Today, millions of miles of high-pressure steel pipelines form the invisible arteries of the global economy, moving continuous flows of energy across continents.
But the physical pipes are only half the legacy. The legal framework they had to invent on the fly is arguably even more impactful.
Yes, let's talk about the law. Imagine being a judge in the 1860s trying to apply standard English common law to crude oil.
It wouldn't work.
Common law was designed for static property. You own the dirt, you own the tree on the dirt, you own the coal buried under the dirt. But oil is a fluid.
It moves.
It moves through porous rock under pressure. If I drill a well on my land, but my pipe taps into a reservoir that stretches under your land, and I suck all the oil out, did I steal from you?
It's the ultimate property rights paradox. The courts had no precedent for subterranean fluid dynamics.
So they adopted something called the rule of capture, drawing heavily from old laws regarding wild game, like shooting a bird that flies over your property line.
Oh, interesting.
The courts decided that oil, like a wild animal, is fugitive. It belongs to whoever captures it first. If I drill on my land and drain your oil, it's mine. The only way you can protect your oil is to drill your own well faster and pump harder.
Which is exactly what incentivized the maddening, hyper-aggressive over-drilling in places like Pithole. The law literally required you to drain the reservoir as fast as possible before your neighbor did, which collapsed the geological pressure and ruined the fields.
Precisely. To manage this madness, scrambling boomtown lawyers had to invent entirely new legal concepts. They popularized the oil lease, renting the right to drill without buying the farm.
All right.
They established royalty percentages. They fully developed the bizarre concept of severing mineral rights from surface rights. Meaning today, you can buy a house and own the grass, the trees, and the driveway, but a massive energy conglomerate can legally own the dirt 1,000 feet beneath your living room.
It's a strange concept.
All of that legal friction was prototyped in the 1860s.
We also have to acknowledge the scientific legacy here. The refining processes that started with Silliman's glass retorts and Frash's copper oxide experiments, they laid the groundwork for modern petrochemical engineering.
Yeah, that's huge.
Those makeshift, highly dangerous labs evolved into the massive, high-tech cracking facilities that today produce not just fuels, but the plastics, fertilizers, and pharmaceuticals that sustain modern life.
And finally, there's the cultural legacy, the wildcatter mentality. It is this deeply ingrained, profoundly American belief that the earth hides a lottery ticket.
The big strike.
It's the conviction that if you just have enough nerve, if you're willing to risk everything and drill 1 foot deeper, a single lucky strike can completely change your destiny overnight. That psychological DNA thread runs straight from Uncle Billy Smith in Titusville, into the massive spindletop boom in Texas, into the Roughnecks of Oklahoma, and right up into the modern, high-tech shale fracking revolution.
When you step back and connect all of this to the bigger picture, the historical synthesis is really quite staggering. Look at the modern petroleum industry today.
It's massive.
It is perhaps the most highly regulated, technologically advanced, globally standardized system on the planet. It involves seismic imaging via supercomputers, offshore platforms that rival the Apollo program in engineering complexity, and massive geopolitical treaties.
Right. It is the definition of a buttoned-up, massive corporate system.
And yet, every single foundational element of that highly polished, trillion-dollar system, the continuous flow logistics, the horizontal corporate integration, the mineral rights laws, the fractional distillation chemistry, every bit of it had to be prototyped from scratch by desperate men guessing in mud puddles, dodging snapping iron cables, and fighting Teamsters in the woods.
It's incredible.
To contain the explosive physical energy of the oil, they literally had to invent a new kind of capitalist economy.
It really is the ultimate irony. The most sterile, heavily guarded boardroom in a modern global energy conglomerate owes its entire operational structure to a guy who gave himself a fake military title and a mob of guys gambling in the mud.
It was the violent, chaotic adolescence of the industrial age.
It absolutely was. So let's recap this immense journey we've taken today. We started with a civilization running out of whale oil, saved by a 69-foot hole dug by an amateur in Pennsylvania.
Edwin Drake.
We watched that spark ignite Pithole City, an entire metropolis built in 8 months that burned hot and fast before selling for $4.37. We saw Van Sickle's continuous flow pipeline break the monopoly of the horse-drawn wagons, and we witnessed the horrific, explosive toll of the oil fires that desperate men simply accepted as the cost of doing business.
Right.
We watched John D. Rockefeller survey that blood and chaos and coldly decide to use chemistry and train rebates to monopolize the bottleneck. And through it all, we saw an industry claw its way out of the earth to completely reshape the physical, legal, and economic reality of the modern world.
It's a stark reminder that the systems we take for granted are often built on a foundation of intense, unregulated risk.
But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, lingering thought to mull over. We talk about how in 1863 Confederate cavalry forces specifically targeted and burned the Burning Springs oil field in West Virginia.
Right.
Just a decade prior to that raid, petroleum was nothing more than a weird, foul-smelling sludge you bought in a tiny glass bottle to rub on a sore knee. It was a novelty.
A total novelty.
And then, almost overnight, due to a slight shift in chemistry and extraction, it became a critical strategic military asset that entire armies would cross enemy lines just to destroy.
The speed of that transition from rural curiosity to the engine of empire is truly terrifying when you think about it.
It leaves you wondering about the world we live in right this second. As we look around today at our newest, most novel technologies, the massive data centers processing language models, the rare earth minerals sitting in the batteries of our phones, the orbital satellite networks we currently treat as mere conveniences for watching videos, or curious leaps in tech. Which one of them is quietly undergoing that exact same transition?
Which one will be next?
Which everyday novelty is rapidly becoming the very thing that tomorrow's empires will burn cities to the ground to control. Keep questioning the history beneath your feet and the true cost of the systems that power your life. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.